Beat me to it, Krishna. How's your day been so far? And we'll get going. Everybody looks like they're muted right now. I'm going to go ahead and officially mute everybody. I think we've all had the experience where one person is not muted and they don't realize it, but the rest of us know. So let me undo
like that person always has a salad or something, finishing up dinner.
Or shuffling papers, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking an hour out of your Wednesday evening to join us. I am especially excited. I get the pleasure of working with and for our speaker on a daily basis at Prompt. So I know that what he has to share today is just great. No pressure, Jordan. I just know you're going to get a lot out of it, and I'm excited to facilitate him sharing what he's going to share. So I will introduce Jordan formally. Jordan is currently the co-founder and CTO at Prompt, which is an EdTech company with a mission to make students better writers. He has degrees in computer science and economics from MIT, where he spent years as a research assistant working on EdTech projects in MIT's Media Lab. And he may have won a hackathon or two here or there, probably more than a few. Jordan has founded multiple tech companies, including Prompt. He's worked for Teach for America, including teaching through TFA's 4 Weeks for America program. And he currently teaches an Intro to Computer Science high school class as a volunteer with Code Nation. So he's a busy guy. So I greatly appreciate, Jordan, your time tonight. And welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to be here.
So let's start off with what to me is a pretty obvious question. Why MIT? How did you end up there? And as you entered there, did you have a game plan for what you were going to study and what your goals were after that?
Yeah, so it may seem like an obvious question, but I think I have a non-obvious answer for this one. So I interview applicants for MIT, and I feel like everyone has a better MIT origin story than I do. They often ask this question, and I kind of preface it with, this is not typical. But I think it's a cool story because it has a testament to a single teacher. So I had a teacher my freshman year in high school who I adored. He taught geometry. And when I was looking at applying to college, trying to consider where I was going to go junior year, he sort of made this offhand remark of like, you should look into MIT. I had not really heard of MIT or certainly looked into it much prior to that. I did when he mentioned it, and I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. This is exactly kind of what I'm looking for. There's a bunch of geeks, there's a bunch of math, there's a bunch of science. Seems right for me. So I kind of put it on the back burner for a little while. I got involved in FIRST Robotics and went to a robotics competition. I'm not sure if anybody here has done FIRST Robotics. I feel like given the crowd, probably someone has, but FIRST Robotics competitions are basically a big party. There was a particular alum of FIRST who was at my first competition, who they sort of put up on a pedestal. They're like, this guy went to MIT. He was on a robotics team here in Michigan. And I was like, I want to be just like that. And so basically these two data points collided. My one high school teacher who made this offhand remark and this particular FIRST Robotics alum that I ran into. I realized that I wanted to apply to MIT. I applied. As an example of sort of how off the beaten path this was for me in my high school, I applied to MIT. I told my counselors that I wanted to go to MIT. And I got a letter about a month after I applied from Michigan Technical Institute in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. MTI is where my counselors had sent my high school transcripts instead of MIT. So I had the fun of getting to write a letter to MIT explaining the situation, and it all worked out. But that's sort of why I went to MIT. Your question about if I had a plan when I entered there, not so much. I knew I wanted to study actually economics more than computer science, and I kind of got swept up with the fun of computer science while I was there. But I just knew I wanted to try a lot of different things, and I certainly got the opportunity to do that while I was there. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that, but got involved in entrepreneurship and some other initiatives. So didn't so much enter with a plan, but certainly exited with a pretty clear path defined.
That's pretty funny. I actually didn't know that. So that's great leeway into entrepreneurship. How did Prompt come about? So Prompt is a small edtech or a newer edtech startup. Where along the line did that come into play? Where did the idea come from? Maybe just give us a little bit of background on Prompt.
Yeah, so we were not EdTech specific when we started. Prompt, what we do now is we make students better writers. We work directly with students in high schools, education institutions like education consultants, foundations, and we deliver writing tutoring in the form of writing feedback and video coaching, stuff like that. When we started, we were just a feedback company and not education specific. So we were started by me and my technical co-founder and our CEO, our non-technical co-founder, if you will. Worked at McKinsey, and McKinsey's consultancy, they have sort of a system in place where any consultant can get feedback from another person in McKinsey who's on the other side of the globe while they're sleeping. So they can turn around this feedback in like 12 hours, and they're mostly doing it on pitch decks and reports and these things that they're delivering to clients. Upon leaving McKinsey, he realized that this was a service that a lot of people could use, being able to get feedback on any sort of content from somebody who has expertise in that subject in as little as 6 hours. So that was our initial sort of mission and proposition. We sourced all these people with this like really arcane expertise in case somebody submitted, a paper on fluid dynamics. We had somebody who could review it. In case somebody submitted a med school application, we had someone who could review it. 80% or so of the things that were getting submitted our first year were college application essays. So we're like, maybe we could make a business out of this. So we pivoted into helping students with their college application essays, providing feedback and coaching on those essays. And then we've scaled since then in the education space, doing writing tutoring more generally. So we do a little bit with academic work. We're still mostly focused on the college admission space, but using that as a tool to teach students how to write better.
So it sounds like along the way, you were getting this signal saying that this is the area to move into, and you paid attention enough to move into that direction. So were you still a student when Prompt started?
I was still a student. Yeah, I was I think the sophomore before my junior year of undergrad is when we started Prompt. Yeah.
Okay. So balancing being a co-founder with being a student, how did that work out for you?
Yeah, not so well for the student part of me. Some semesters, I'll tell you that. It was tricky, and there was a lot of stuff that I liked doing outside of those two worlds as well. There was initiatives at MIT where Melissa mentioned the EdTech research that I got to do, and I actually got to teach while I was in school as well, and I enjoyed all of that. Balancing it was hard. I definitely had to make sacrifices a lot of times. Sometimes those sacrifices were in the company, sometimes they were in my academics, sometimes they were in some of those other extracurriculars that I got to do. There were times when I had to take a step back and be like, I'm doing too much. I need to quit a few things. And I did that. That was extremely difficult. And I'm really happy that at the time I didn't either quit the company or quit really on my academic stuff. I have a lot of friends who dropped out of school to work on a company, and most of them are still doing really well. So that's working. But I knew that wasn't quite the path for me because I really enjoyed school, and I knew that I really enjoyed education. I still kind of want to be a teacher. So I feel like I really needed to finish school and finish learning what was in my curriculum for computer science and economics. So I finished both of those, and I'm glad I stuck with the company because it's been extremely fun. Since we finished, we pivoted, as I mentioned, from this general feedback company to doing some more education specific stuff. And I'm really happy with that pivot. I'm really happy with getting to work with people who are trying to help students every day.
Nice. So I imagine as a college student, you really didn't have a large bankroll to start this company. So how does that side of year one or even pre-year one of Prompt work? Were you able to seek outside funding?
Yeah. We were able to get outside funding after I had graduated, so a couple years into the company. While you're a student, you don't have a lot of money, as I'm sure all of you know. So that was definitely tricky. But the other, the flip side of that is most of your needs are sort of taken care of as part of being a full-time on-campus undergrad. So I also didn't have to really worry about feeding myself and stuff because that was taken care of as part of my tuition. So there wasn't a lot of stress in terms of like sustenance at the time. And by the time we were ready to like dive into this full time, I was out of school. We wanted to make a thing of it. We were able to secure some money from some angel investors. That was helped by, we did a startup accelerator in New York called Dream It, that at that time was education technology specific. So we were in a cohort of 10 companies that were all focused on education, and we were able to secure some funding as part of going into that accelerator. So that helped as well.
So once you're out of college, you're doing Prompt full time. It always takes time to really generate revenue from a business. How did you manage your day-to-day expenses? Were you holding down some kind of other job to handle that?
Yeah, a little bit. I did what I dubbed like some consulting work here and there. So while I was in school, Melissa mentioned I started a couple of companies. The company that I started before Prompt was basically sort of a web development agency, but we were focused on helping people develop minimum viable products for their ideas. So while we were at MIT, we realized there were all these people coming out of business school at Harvard and MIT and Boston University who had these great ideas and no ability to build any sort of product because they were not product people. So we were like, why don't we go to these people? We'll offer to build their products. We'll build them a minimum viable product, just what they need to get in front of investors. We'll help them with that initial pitch to investors. And then should they get investment, we'll help them hire their technical team so that they can continue working on this, and we'll sort of wash our hands of it at that time. And that worked out pretty well. We got to work on a lot of different projects that we really enjoyed. We weren't really invested in the long haul. These were like, 6-month projects. And so when I finished school, we were sort of full-time on Prompt, but every now and then we would need some money to fill the gaps. We could lean back on some of that network that we built up as part of the other company. It was called Colossal. And so we leverage that Colossal network to try and find some other clients to work with and just pick up a short-term job to help pay the bills.
It sounds like a common founder story.
For sure.
So you're currently CTO of Prompt. You started as CTO. How has your role at Prompt changed from day one? What did your day-to-day look like, and how has that morphed and changed till today?
Yeah, it's changed like 100%, probably 100 different times. So when we first started, there were 3 of us, 3 co-founders, and we were just a team of 3 for quite a while. So being one of 3, I had to wear a lot of hats. I did a lot of marketing. I did some sales. I made some cold calls, which I would never dream of doing now because we have such a good sales team, and that's not my particular skill set. But you kind of have to do everything those early days in the company. And so I've always been responsible for our technology, for the product that we're putting in front of our users every day, and I've really enjoyed that work. But over time, my role has really narrowed and focused on just the tech and the product pieces. So I've got to shed some of the other operations and sales and marketing and social media I did for a while, which is a bad idea because I don't even have like a personal Instagram. So I was really trying to figure out how this is working from day one. And so my role today is much more in sort of engineering management, which I quite enjoy. I've always enjoyed software engineering. I've loved writing code, and I still like writing code. But I also like managing a team of people who enjoy those same things. And so I get to work with others on our team who are writing code. I get to interface with our many sort of third-party partners who use our APIs or are leveraging our platform in different ways. I enjoy meeting with them and figuring out how we can deliver value to the students that they work with. And then I also get to lead some, it's what I call like special technical projects every now and then. So I'm not necessarily as involved in day-to-day feature building, the sprints and road maps that we're trying to knock out every week. But I do get to take on some larger sort of important but not urgent work. So things that might get shifted in a schedule, but stuff that's important for us to invest in technically.
Now, just for context, because I think I left this off at the beginning, how old is Prompt today?
Yeah, Prompt is almost 6 years old, and we give a different number depending on who's asking, because the first 2.5, 3 years were part-time. So if we want to seem younger, we sort of leave off those 3 years, but it was 6 years of learning and 6 years of working, so I like to include them whenever I can.
Nice. So as you were scaling Prompt, what has been the most difficult part, the biggest challenge, and what has been the biggest surprise, either in a good way or a bad way?
Yeah, good question. The biggest challenge, I would say, I mentioned all those different roles that I played, and it wasn't challenging. The biggest challenge wasn't having to do so many things. It was switching between all those different things. So especially early on, like I'm not very good at like context switching, and this is a skill that I've tried to build up over time. But I was the type of person who's like really good at sitting and working on a coding project over the course of a day and hopefully getting through what I wanted to. Was not a person who was particularly good at doing that for 30 minutes and then checking on our, Instagram, feed for a while and replying to people and then jumping in a support channel and supporting people. And that being that nimble is important early on in a startup. So that was very challenging early on, and it's something that we tried to fill in the gaps as soon as we could. And I think that also feeds into what I was most surprised by, which is just I'm consistently surprised by the value that every single person that we hire brings to the table. So I think part of being an early founder or early employee in a company is you're doing so many different things and you're splitting your time between all these different initiatives. Sometimes it's hard to envision what hiring somebody full time to work on one of those things would look like, because you're like, oh, I'm spending 20% of my time doing sales. We're going to hire a salesperson. They're going to spend all their time on this. People are expensive. Is this an initiative that's really going to be worth it? Or can we continue to sort of bootstrap and just do this piece ourselves? And then you hire that person and they do just a phenomenal job in that role. They're so much better at it than you were. They bring a different perspective and different skills to the table. And so we've hired a number of people now. And every single time we hire somebody, I'm surprised by the value and the perspective that they're bringing to our team as a whole.
That's great. There are so many more questions I want to ask down this track, but I want to make sure we cover a few different things. So yep. On the technical side, for Prompt, you have a dev team now, which you didn't at the beginning. It was you and one of your co-founders. Yep. So when you're hiring a new developer, what are you looking for?
Yeah, we're looking first and foremost for sort of a cultural fit. Well, there is a level of competency we're looking for. So I say first and foremost, cultural fit. You have to be, an actual software developer and bring coding skills and engineering skills to the table. But, bar people who don't meet that threshold, we're looking for cultural fits. We're looking for people who we're really going to enjoy working with because we're such a small team. I know that I am personally going to be spending a lot of time with each person that we hire, and everyone else on the team is too. So it's important that every person that we hire right now really gets along and fits in on the team that we're putting together. I think that's less important when you're looking at, medium and certainly large companies, because they have so many different teams and functional units. They can kind of plug you in anywhere. You can switch around within a company, and that's great if that's what you're looking for. That's not a luxury that we have since we are so small. So we're looking for people who are a cultural fit, and we found some good proxies for that. So we hire, as most companies do, sort of junior and senior level engineers. For junior level engineers, we're looking for people who are particularly mentorable. And so these are people who have a willingness and desire to continue to learn and grow. They typically are people who know what they want to learn. They've identified skills or frameworks that they want to pick up for themselves. And then on the flip side, for people who are more senior, we're looking for people who can mentor people who are already on our team. So people who are coming to the team with a broader set of skills that they are willing and able to share, people who enjoy teaching other people the technical skills that they already have and learning along with the team. And we found that sort of framework of looking at mentorability and how well somebody's going to mentor within the framework of our team, that's a pretty good proxy for cultural fits, which is a sort of more amorphous term that can be hard to zoom in on.
That's helpful. So what's Prompt's current stack? And when you're hiring, are you necessarily looking for people with experience in that stack? How important is prior experience in those specific technologies from your perspective?
Yeah, our stack right now we work on a couple of different platforms. They both use Django, Python as a backend, and on the front end, we are using a combination of Vue and React. We're using Vuex and Redux. Familiarity with any of those particular languages is not important to us. It's slightly more important in a junior engineer than in a senior engineer, just because a senior engineer in theory has demonstrated sort of an ability to pick up new technologies and run with them. But what we're really looking for is people who can exhibit good engineering patterns in whatever languages they've already programmed in, and are like genuinely and legitimately interested in learning our stack if they don't already know it. So I think there's a lot of different, ways that you can engineer. There's a lot of different languages you can engineer, and it's totally okay not to like certain languages and not to want to learn them. Unfortunately, because we have such a small team and only a couple products that we're working with, we have only a few frameworks and languages that we work with. We're not going to go with somebody who doesn't like our stack. And we're not going to want to hire somebody who's using our stack even though they don't like it. That tends not to be a good mixture. So luckily, there's a ton of companies out there all using different stacks. There's a lot of bigger companies that use every technology across their stack in various different products and such. And so that's not so limiting if you're looking for a job sort of anywhere in the industry. But it is important that people, as I said, sort of have a demonstrated ability to use the patterns and engineering principles that we use on a day-to-day basis.
That makes sense. Now, I personally think Prompt's dev culture is unique in great ways. I know you rub elbows with different CTOs around the New York City area. That's where you're based out of.
Yep.
In those conversations, in those relationships, everything you just shared, do you get the sense that that's a common perspective, both on the hiring, what people are looking for? I guess, what can you share, again, from the New York City perspective on what CTOs, what hiring managers are looking for, particularly for first-time devs?
Yeah, so for junior engineers, that mentorability is huge. That's something that I hear across the board. When I'm talking, so Melissa alluded to, I'm in a group. We call ourselves a collective, but that's just a name that we've given ourselves. So I'm in this group of CTOs in New York. That's all founder CTOs, which we think is important. And there's all people who are running companies of roughly like 20 to 100 people. So all sort of about the same size as our company. That mentorability is important. People are always talking about, I brought on this new person. How quickly are they learning? How quickly are they contributing to our code base? When we're evaluating people who we want to hire, it's really a matter of like, who on our team is going to mentor this person. If there's not a clear answer to that question, then it's probably not a great hire. And that's not to say that that person is not a good fit for any team or that person can't be mentored or taught. It just means that like we don't have the right person for that. So when we're hiring, we often ask questions like, how do you learn best? What have you taught yourself, and how have you, taught that to yourself? What learning environment do you find yourself thriving in? What types of people do you learn best from or enjoy working with? Those are all questions where we're trying to get at figuring out if this is somebody who can learn from somebody in our team, who can, get a spec or an issue that's describing what they need to work on and can ask the right person the right questions of how to actually implement it, even if they don't know exactly how to do it from day one. So it's fine not to know the stack or not to know exactly how to approach a problem. We're looking for people who can take the next step and figure out how to solve that for themselves, which often involves interfacing with somebody else on the team. So that I think is a common thread across the CTOs that I talk with. We're looking for people who can fill that role. And the flip side of that is it's also important to have the right, level and mixture of senior people on your team who can do the mentoring and can help newcomers on the team as they get up to speed.
Nice. Okay. Again, with your collective, I like that name. That's really catchy and fun.
Yeah.
How important do you get the sense that any kind of pedigree is? I mean, you've got the MIT name behind you. Everybody on this call is going to have the Penn name behind them. How important is that in the process of just the whole application process? And then what are the key, well, I'll just start with that.
Yeah, it definitely gets you in the door. Like it will keep your resume from getting thrown out as fast as some other resumes. And that's important because, people who are hiring are looking through a ton of resumes, talking with a lot of people. It is unfortunately not a very efficient process to hire people. That's also something that a lot of the CTOs lament is they have trouble filling positions. But having the pedigree, having Penn on your resume, having some background working on projects as part of this program is definitely helpful, and will definitely sort of get your foot in the door, get you a phone screen or a first round interview, and is helpful in that sense.
Okay. And then when it comes down to, well, when folks are preparing, I think somebody earlier mentioned that they're doing interview prep now. As we go about that, what things should we be focusing on? What are the most important preparations we can take to stand out once we do get in the room and do have that interview?
Yeah, good question. And I'll approach this sort of from the most general to some very like tactical things that I think are useful. So most general, I have a friend that I go back to MIT and recruit with sometimes. He works for Factual now. And we were talking with some younger people that we know at MIT, and one of them was lamenting, like, I'm not good with algorithms. I'm not really passing my technical interviews, I think. So I'm not good at algorithms. What should I do? And my friend was like, be better at algorithms. I think that that's important. When you're, at the end of the day, we in the tech industry have this process of doing technical interviews. I have some thoughts on the whole process and what it means and perhaps how it can be better, but that is, what you're up against when you're interviewing. And so technical interviews are not like aptitude tests. They're not, trying to figure out how well you can do without preparing or how good you are technically without having seen a problem before. They're sort of the opposite of that. There's something that you should be preparing for, and something that you very much can prepare for. And what people are looking for in those whiteboard interviews or technical interviews of any kind is they're looking for how you think through problems. So make sure that you're talking through how you're thinking about something. If you're stuck, explain why you're stuck and what information you're missing or what you're looking for. At the end of the day, that should all be much more important than if you get like a quote unquote right answer, or if you're able to call out the right time complexity or use the right data structure from the beginning of your solution. Companies that are looking for those like very specific, correct technical answers are probably not the companies you want to work for if you're not able to give them. I'm not someone who is often able to give them in technical interviews. And I think that there's a lot of people who I know who are very good engineers or very good managers and might not necessarily thrive in that interview process. And a lot of people who just don't realize that it's not necessarily about getting the right answer. It's about trying to work through the problem. Some other tactical things that you can do as you're going into these interviews: make sure you know a lot about the company and what they do and the products before you step in. So if you're able to describe their product, if you've used their product, those are all huge, like good marks. If you're able to talk with somebody who works at that company, I've seen some people who will often like drop like, oh, I saw so-and-so at your company is working on this, and like reference a blog post that person's written about something they're doing technically at the company or something like that. That goes a long way in showing that you care about the company, that you are interested in the people that are there, and that you are interested in the problems that they are working on. So if you have the opportunity to use their products, or if they are sort of like an enterprise product that you're not able to get your hands on as a regular old consumer, you might be able to talk with somebody who uses the product. So, oh, I talked with a teacher who's using Google Classroom. They mentioned this. I think that, we can, perhaps can we talk about why you guys implemented it that way, or some other product discussion that you can have in your interview. So all of those are good things that you can sort of tactically bring to the table while you're interviewing. I'm sure a lot of you have heard this before, but my best tip that works for me when I'm interviewing is to treat it as an interview of the company as opposed to the other way around. So, you're hot stuff. You got all sorts of places you can work. You went to Penn. That's really cool. So when you're interviewing, figure out if that's the place you want to be. And if it's not, that's fine. And I think that whether or not that's true, that perspective gets me and a lot of people that I know through some tough interviews.
That's great advice. I imagine that gives you a boost of confidence, even if it's temporary and fake, enough to perform better in the interview than you would otherwise. And it's really true. It is, you want to know if you want to work there. That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I want to venture into EdTech specifically, but I failed to mention at the beginning, if any of you have questions as we go along, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll have some time at the end. Some of our classmates sent me questions via email earlier, so I have a list of those, but any questions you have along the way, we'll get to as many as we can at the end. So go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll make note of them and address them. So Prompt is an ed tech company. You've been in that industry for a few years now. How has the ed tech industry changed since Prompt first ventured into ed tech?
Yeah. So since we entered EdTech, I think that EdTech has gotten a little bit more popular. I see more people doing EdTech companies. I think that there's a little bit more money in EdTech than there used to be. A lot of that is that universities and big like high school districts and education foundations are willing to spend money on technology in ways that they wouldn't have before. They would probably have spent the same money on bringing some consultants into a high school to tell somebody what's up. So that's kind of cool, and that's exciting because it brings a lot of new ideas to the table and lets a lot of new companies sort of get off the ground. I've seen a lot more in companies trying to produce measurable outcomes. So education, particularly like K-12 education, is very much like this black box where you have a teacher in front of a classroom. It's really hard to introspect what's happening in that classroom, how students are learning, what they're learning, if what they're learning is actually useful for their next grade or for college or for their job. So there's a lot of companies that are trying to quantify that and surface those statistics to at sort of an aggregate level to schools or to districts or to states or to universities. And I think that that's kind of cool. There's a lot that perhaps stems from that, but I think a lot of focus additionally on equity. And I think this is a cool space because I think we're entering a time when technology can solve equity problems or at least shed light on problems in equity that it couldn't even just like 5 years ago. So we're able to apply like machine learning on data in fields like student retention or matriculation into college, why students are staying in college, why they're dropping out, who they're associating with and how that may affect how they're learning, what types of classes they're in, what classes they enjoy taking. All of that, we're starting to get some really rich data sets, particularly from universities and some from higher end high schools. And we're able to build products that better target students and meet them where they're at, both socially and academically, and try and target students who might be at risk either of, say, dropping out of a school intentionally or unintentionally, or perhaps not moving forward, whatever that means, sort of where their level is. So those are all exciting places where I'm seeing technology applied in education. And then the last thing I'll mention is I've heard a lot of investors talking about investing on the edge of education or companies on the edge of education. And what they're usually talking about is education is traditionally bucketed into like K through 6, and then like middle school, 7th, 8th, and then high school is 9, 12. And then there's like community college, and then like traditional undergrad, and then like professional programs, grad degrees. And so there's a lot of emphasis on the transitions between those sort of buckets. So it used to be that people generally built a product that was specifically for one of those buckets. They were the math blaster games that K through 6 kids played to better their math skills, or they were the new testing software for high school students that was adaptive and gave them new questions. There's a lot of technology now that's helping to ensure students are making the transitions between those levels properly, and that more students are upskilling as they're going from elementary to middle to high school, and then particularly that high school to undergrad or high school to professional program, whatever it may be. But that journey from high school to whatever happens next, there's a lot of technology that's helping in that transition.
That's a lot going on. It sounds like in that there is a lot of avenues, technical avenues, that are not necessarily what would fit in the box of software development. I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of data analysis, AI, so kind of whatever your technical proclivity, there's a space for you to fill in there.
Cool. And user experience is huge in education. I was mentioning this just before the call, but like, you can get away with some really hard to use software in like finance or enterprise, business software. You can get away with software that's hard to use, but still saves a company money or reduces their cost base or something. You cannot get away with that in education. And the problem is confounded by having all these different types of users. We see this at Prompt, where we're working with students who are on their phones all day. We're working with teachers who are only ever in front of a computer when their principal forces them to be. We are dealing with like counselors who are really tech savvy and want all the data on their students that they can get. all of those people engage with technology in a very different way, and building products that work well for all of them is really difficult. And you need products that they're actually all going to use if they're going to be effective.
So for the teachers in the audience, or somebody who works in a school that sees inefficiencies, that sees areas that could be improved, what would be your advice if they're looking to be part of the solution for whatever that organizational inefficiency is? What would you recommend them to do to kind of take steps to fill that space?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that depending on your life situation, your comfort with going out and solving problems as an entrepreneur, my answer here may be different. But if you don't want to start a company to solve the problem that you're trying to solve, some interim solutions that I think work include looking at software that is generally built around like workflows. So there's a lot of software like Airtable and like Notion. These are pieces of software that are built for people who aren't necessarily engineers, but are still pretty technical pieces of software and can help you just automate different workflows, whether that's automating the way that you're, say, like grading, essays or grading tests, or automating the way that attendance is done. Those are just two very specific examples, but this is general software that I think you can build out some workflows. And that might be a good place to start if you're seeing like an inefficiency in getting data from one place to another, or an inefficiency in trying to aggregate data in a way that's useful for you as a teacher or an administrator. Trying to do it at that level first and seeing if you can build a solution that actually solves your problem, or something that other people think is cool and headed in the right direction. I see a lot of technology starting that way. And then if you want to continue beyond that, you could take that piece of technology and try and give it to a technologist, or you guys are all technical yourselves. You could try and code a solution around it yourself, and try and build a web app or try and build a mobile app that addresses what you're doing. So many of the companies that my cohort sort of CTOs and our group of people in the EdTech Accelerator, so many of the companies that we had started began that way, with somebody just trying to solve a problem that one of their teachers or themselves as a teacher faced, and realizing that more people faced it and more people wanted the app that they built for themselves. And suddenly, that happens for just a little while, and then you have a company on your hands.
That's actually a good transition. I want to touch on some of the questions that were sent in to me earlier, and I see we have extra questions coming in, so that's great. So when you started Prompt, you were still a student. You, by then, I'm sure, had won a number of hackathons, so you had some dev chops. Where would you rate your, just how you rated your own technical competency at that point? I mean, becoming a CTO, becoming a founder, and having the technical burden fall on your shoulders or joint shoulders is a big deal. How did you say, I know enough to step into this, and how much was kind of trial by fire, figuring out what you needed to know when you needed to know it?
Yeah. By the time I started the company, I would have rated my technical competence pretty high, but definitely not as high as like the people that I knew who just wanted to be sort of like staff or principal software engineers and were really headed for that career track and really liked writing code and crafting software. I knew that I wasn't quite as interested in that as I was in pieces of like product management and engineering management, leading teams and leading product vision. So I focused a little bit more on developing that than developing my software engineering chops. The second piece to your question about like how I know basically what I was doing early on as a CTO, I certainly didn't. And I learned it along the way. Luckily, being at MIT really helped me first traverse and then learn to cope with imposter syndrome early on. So I kind of always felt like I didn't belong in a different way there. And so early on as a founder, definitely feel the same way, and heard that from pretty much every founder I've talked to is like, man, every other founder seems to know what they're doing, and I just feel like I don't. And that's just because there's so many different things you have to do. And being in charge for a technical product as it grows is really challenging. But it's a little bit easier when it's your technical product from the beginning and you sort of know it in and out. And we're starting to get to a place where that's not the case. I don't know how every little piece of our product is architected or necessarily works anymore. But we built a team of people that we really trust to craft that software and to manage the team that does. And so those first few technical hires are also really key in keeping that momentum going.
You mentioned that you had some classmates who were venturing on a kind of very definitive development path with sites at higher level developing roles. What made you choose the entrepreneurial route versus route that I'm sure you'd be sitting very comfortable with a very cushy salary by this point, I have no doubt. So why the one choice over the easier one in some ways, financially easier?
Yeah. I I did not make the conscious choice to be an entrepreneur, and a lot of entrepreneurs I know will say the same thing. They didn't make that choice. I sort of started making websites when I was in high school and realized that people would pay me to do that, so I started getting paid for it. And then when I was in college, I took a little hiatus to get acclimated to college life, but then I started Colossal, which I mentioned earlier, where we were building those software products for people coming out of business school. And that was just like an opportunity. I saw it as something to do outside the classroom that was fun, that built off of skills I already had. I liked building those products better than I liked building the software in our classes that was so structured. So I just kept sort of doing that. And then I looked back and I was a couple of years into having this company on my hands. And at that point I was kind of like, oh, I guess I'm an entrepreneur. You know, my primary form of income is a company that I started. So that seems to fit the definition. But I think things may have been different if I was like exiting MIT and I was choosing between like starting a company or, you know, taking a job offer that I already had. It would have definitely been harder to start a company if those options were on the table. But it was honestly would have been very difficult to leave a company that I had already started and was enjoying running, just to take another offer that came along later.
All right. If you could go back and talk to 22-year-old Jordan, or whatever age you were when you were getting this off the ground, what would you do differently? What would you tell him to do differently?
Yeah. So there's so many things that we did with Prompt that didn't work. Almost everything that we tried didn't work, and it just so happens that we, you know, kept one of our investors and advisors likes to say every time that we see him, he's like, just keep, you know, the lights on long enough that you can keep coding, and eventually this is all going to work out. Like, we're going to figure out the product market fit. We sort of figured that out. We're going to figure out who your best customers are, and we've sort of figured that out at this point. But early on, it was like, just keep coding. That's what he kept saying every time we saw him. He's like, you have enough food, keep coding. So that's, I mean, part of the drive when you're starting this sort of company. But if I was to talk to my 22-year-old self and I didn't have the hindsight of like all the 90% of things that we tried that didn't work specifically, I think that what I would tell myself is like, just focus on fewer things. We were so interested early on in chasing like the next shiny opportunity, and they came along so often. And so we'd be like, oh, this, you know, partner wants to integrate with us. It's going to be amazing. They're huge. They're this big school district. They're this big education conglomerate. There's this company that we want to work with. And it so rarely pans out, and you have to put so much effort into it that it's really hard when you're a small team to really see those initiatives through. And so I think we would have been much better off sort of really narrowing our focus on exactly, you know, the small set of students that we really wanted to serve and serve really well before we built up a company around that idea. And so the more narrow your focus can be, you want to, you know, always trade a really exuberant, exhilarated customer for 10 people who just kind of buy your product and are fine with it. And so finding those people and delivering that product is incredibly important and valuable early on.
Yeah, it sounds like you can't always avoid the mistakes, and if you knew all those answers when you started, you need that benefit of hindsight and the mistakes to figure out exactly what direction to go in. Let me see what kind of questions we have coming in. Angel investors, how did you find the investors that you had early on? What was that process like for you?
Yeah, it's really difficult. We spent a lot of time actually seeking like venture capital before we realized that angels were a better route for us. So angels, when we approach them, we're looking for people who are aligned in mission. And they're much easier to find in angels than in venture capitalists in our case, because we're not like a super high, like uber growth company. And so we're, really focused on trying to serve as many students as possible and deliver a product that really makes them better writers. We're not looking to burn our investor dollars trying to acquire new customers, which is the business model of a lot of startups early on, and it works very well for them. Angels tend to be a little bit more mission driven. They tend to like to be a little bit more involved in companies. And so there's a lot of them that are specifically interested in education. There's a lot that are interested in issues of equity, which we're able to touch on. There's a lot that are interested in making people like better communicators. And so writing, we think, is the best way to go about doing that. And we were able to target those people. So when you're approaching angels, it's important to find somebody who agrees with you on mission. They're not going to invest in you just to make a quick buck. If they wanted to do that, they wouldn't be doing angel investing, I assure you. So they are looking for companies that they really care about, companies that they want to be involved in, even if just tangentially as sort of an advisor. And so finding somebody who agrees with your mission is important.
And how do you go about finding those angels?
Well, practically, there's a lot of networks. So there's usually syndicates in most major cities. I know we have a lot of people from Dallas, Fort Worth here, so I'm sure there's a syndicate there. We were able to find quite a few in New York, where there's a ton, Boston, obviously in the Bay Area if you're out in California. Globally, there's a ton in pretty much every major city. We have angels that we've worked with in Singapore. Asia is a really hot market for education. And so that's been a place where we've seen a lot of interest from angels. But you can find them, if you're not able to find them literally on like AngelList, and there's a lot of companies that are sort of AngelList clones now. Gust is one of them, not Gusto, that's HR software. Gust is the name of the AngelList competitor. But there's platforms that angels use to try and find companies. You might get some success there. Honestly, you really need to be getting warm intros for anything to work out. So try and find somebody who's worked with the angel before, or at least talked with them. Perhaps they aren't, they're another founder that didn't necessarily take money from the angel, but talk with them about doing a deal and have them make an intro. That's going to go a lot faster, and it's going to go further than trying to reach out on your own.
I imagine there's a lot of questions around funding, especially for a chat like this, and a lot of it is circumstantial. So would there be any one or two don't make this type of mistake bits of advice you could give? You get a meeting with an angel, or you're reaching out to an angel, you get one chance to make a good impression, so to speak. What would be the one or two things that you definitely don't want to do to shut that door before it even cracks open?
Yeah. So few, I mean, it's a numbers game trying to get money from investors. You're going to feed your pipeline with a ton of investors, and very few of them are going to want to meet with you, and very few of them are going to want to invest in you. Obviously, rounds typically include, maybe a dozen investors, and you're probably talking with hundreds to get to that point. So I think that there's some things that are important. Most investors really care about unit economics. So they're looking at how much it costs you to acquire a customer, how much it costs you to deliver your product to that customer. What they're looking for is not necessarily that you're like profitable or making money. They're looking for a sort of repeatable process that they can pour money on that's going to make you more money. So if they give you $1 million, how are you going to turn that into 10 or $100 million via sales in some way? And they want to see that process, or at least see that you've thought through that process early on. So you don't necessarily, if you're in the very early stages, you're looking for like seed money, you don't necessarily need to have already proven out that process. That's probably why you're asking for money, but you need to have an idea of what it probably is. And then a lot of investors also like to ask pre-mortem questions. So pre-mortems are like, if this doesn't work, why will that be? What are the top 3 reasons, that this probably won't work? If a lot of them like to ask personal questions. So like, if our relationship doesn't work out, why do you think that will be? Or what, qualities could I exhibit that would make me a bad advisor or bad investor for you? Those are all things that you want to have thought through. So you need to think through if you're taking like sort of an institutional round, they're probably going to get a board seat. So you need to think through who's going to be sitting on your board and what type of people you want advising you. If you're taking their money and you're not giving up control, you need to think about like just what sorts of returns they're looking for. And if you're in a place where you can deliver that as a company, which is dependent on how you envision growing in the near future. So just be ready to have those conversations, whether it's with an angel or with like a more traditional venture capitalist.
That's helpful. When you're figuring out your cost to acquire a customer and just the whole profitability side of a business, how did Prompt figure out the right pricing strategy? I know it was a lot of trial and error, but what was it that got you to the result where you're happy with the prices?
Yeah, a ton of trial and error. I don't know if we are happy with our prices. I wish they were higher. So one of the things that's important to us is we work with a lot of different types of users who have a different ability to spend on essay review. We're helping students with their college admissions essays, which is a very sort of high value essay. It's a place where equity, I think, is a particularly thorny issue. And we work with some high schools that we do pro bono work for, and we work with some high schools and education consultants who pay a pretty penny for some really high-end essay review. And so we try and balance all these different things that we're doing, where we're delivering directly to consumers, to students and families, we're delivering to public high schools, we're delivering to private high schools and sort of like after-school programs. And so we have worked out a pricing structure that seems to work, where we have the flexibility to change our pricing for those different groups, which is important to us. So on the institutional side, we're able to go to a large district and work out pricing for like all of their high schools. That deal will look very different from when we're going to like a single, public high school in a suburban area and trying to help them with essay review. So I'm not giving any specific numbers there because it's kind of tricky to talk about our institutional pricing, but I can be more free on the consumer side. We've tried a lot of different things on the consumer side. We've tried subscriptions to essay review. We've tried delivering essay review at $30, which is I think where we started. We're now in a place where we found that a lot of people care more about like the security that comes with the insurance of having somebody help you with your college essays than necessarily on the physical like essay reviews and video coaching calls and tutoring itself. So a lot of the value that we're delivering in some of our products is just basically ensuring parents that we're going to walk their kids through this process and we're going to get them to the end and they are actually going to finish their essays before the deadlines for the schools that they're applying to. That peace of mind is worth a lot to a lot of parents and to a lot of schools. And so we've built some products around delivering that. And so we balance products like that with just sort of on-demand essay review, where any student can come to us. It's pretty cheap. They can just get an essay reviewed. A lot of them are doing it like 12 hours before their deadlines, which is great. We're happy to help. But that's a very different product and a very different price point for students. So we have played around. I think there was a question on elasticities. As both an economist and an engineer, I like finding ways to build experiments that really actually pull out those elasticities. And so we've done some tests where we literally are A/B testing or ABCD testing a lot of different prices against consumers and seeing where their propensity to spend actually lies. But I think that the bigger lesson here around pricing for me is not necessarily what price you're charging, but what product you're delivering. So, we've more than changing our price, we've changed what product we're actually selling to students. At the end of the day, it's still essay review and video coaching, but it's wrapped up in a different way with a different level of outreach, or being more high touch on our end, or being lower touch and saying, hey, just send us an essay whenever you want, we'll review it in 2 hours. Cool. So there's a lot of push and pull both on the pricing side and on determining what product we're actually selling.
Now, with multiple customer segments like Prompt has, what has been the strategy for accumulating new users?
It's been a battle. The strategy for accumulating new users, we've done a lot on the consumer side that you would see traditional startups doing: Facebook ads, Google ads. We've done, we're trying to meet students where they are. So we've done some like YouTube ads. Advertising hasn't quite worked out. There's some times of the year where we actually see some ROI on advertising, but usually digital ads are not our cup of tea. So we have seen most success with going directly to high schools and getting in front of students where they are, going to like college nights at high schools, selling to high schools directly. And then there's a lot of people who are involved in the college admissions process or involved in tutoring but aren't in a high school. So these are your education consultants. These are your learning centers where students are going for tutoring outside of school. Less than 2% of all tutoring dollars are spent on writing. And we don't think that's because all students are phenomenal writers. We think that's because nobody's really figured out how to deliver essay tutoring or writing tutoring at scale to students in a way that they're actually going to use. And that's the problem that we're trying to solve. So we've had some success with picking up new students just by meeting them where they are, which is usually online at midnight.
I know firsthand, there's a lot that goes on with trying to reach those different segments.
Yeah, MOSA does a lot of that work in props, so.
This one may be hard to answer just because of the way Prompt started. Someone's asking, can you walk through the first 90 days of starting Prompt? So maybe from the point where you went full-time and your two co-founders were full-time, what did that very initial push look like?
Yeah. So when we first went full-time, it's because we were starting our accelerator. And I think this is a particularly good time to talk about a 90-day stretch because we were very guided and we had some directors at the accelerator who were pushing us in a particular direction that turned out to be very good. So over those 90 days, what we did is iterate. So we kept building new products for new customers and seeing what stuck. We were building MVPs. We were selling products that didn't necessarily exist. We would build something that looked like a product, put it in front of a high school principal or put it in front of a student. My co-founder and I were spending a lot of time at Starbucks at NYU and literally going up to students in line at Starbucks and saying, hey, I'll buy you your coffee if you look at this homepage on my laptop and tell me if you would buy this product or even what you think this product is. And so we did a lot of that sort of user research. That was a ton of fun. We did a lot of trying to sell products to students and parents and seeing their price elasticities, as somebody mentioned, seeing what products they were most interested in purchasing. We did a lot of figuring out if we could sell B2B. So we were calling writing centers at universities and saying, hey, can I come over and show you what our product is like? Or can I jump on Zoom and show you what our product is? So when you're early on in your company, you know, your first 90 days, probably honestly, your first 400 days or so, you're just trying to iterate your product as quickly as possible and hone in on who your customers are and what product you're delivering for them. You're trying to find that product market fit that I'm sure a lot of people have heard of. That is paramount. You're not going to have it at the beginning, and that's what you're trying to find. You're trying to find people that you can delight with the product that you're building.
That's very helpful. Thanks for sharing that. You mentioned Zoom. Somebody asked about Zoom, so a really bad segue. The video support you offer to students, is it Zoom-like? What kind of technology is used there to make that happen?
Yeah, good question, because I was just talking with another member of our engineering team about potentially changing what we do for this, but it is Zoom-like. We do not use Zoom. We use a platform that I think Vonage, that phone company, they offer it. It's like Zoom. Basically, WebRTC is the technology that underpins all of these video chat technologies. And you need some sort of relay server in between all the people that are on a video chat. And so this product that we're using acts as that relay server. We looked into using Zoom. Zoom is not great for like programmable video. So the ability to like spin up a new video chat room that has a tutor and a student in it is difficult. Zoom is better suited to like have somebody who has their own Zoom line and can host meetings whenever they want, but not to like click a button and get a new Zoom chat room that was sort of programmatically created. So it's like Zoom. We don't use Zoom specifically. I want to use Twilio. I've been using a lot of Twilio products lately and integrating with their APIs, and they have a cool programmable video. So my conversation today was an engineering conversation over whether or not we could switch to Twilio. And as with most engineering conversations, the answer is maybe.
Maybe. Back when Prompt was hiring its first employees, non-founders, what did that process look like, from the formalities, from the tax side of things, from the legal side of things? You may or may not be able to speak to that. I'm not sure that you did the direct hiring there, but anything you can share on that?
So from the legal side and like that, there's a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy. It's not that easy to start a company and hire people in this country. And so there's a lot of resources that have sprung up over the past few years to address this. Stripe Atlas is the one that has stood out to me. I know a lot of people who are using Atlas. Stripe is a payment processor that a lot of companies, it used to be a lot of startups, but now it's just pretty much everybody uses, because they made it really easy to process credit cards. And so they do all sorts of payment processing now, but they started this program called Atlas that's focused on helping people start companies. So Atlas will take you through everything from founding your LLC or your Delaware C corporation, all the way through hiring people and the tax withholding and all of that. When you get to the point where you're hiring people, you should be talking with a lawyer or an accountant who can help you with some of these things. I guarantee, because we tried, that it's just not worth your time to try and do it yourself. You're going to bulk it, or if you're like me, you're going to bulk at the hourly rate that your accountants and lawyers are charging. But it's so worth it compared to you reading through these insanely arcane state and federal regulations on hiring and withholding. So there's software platforms that automate all of it, but you need someone to take a look and make sure that you're doing it correctly.
It sounds like a headache. It's amazing any companies get started, I think.
I know. Especially we're remote, so we've got people in all sorts of states, and in each state you need to register separately, which is a mess. If you're headed down that route, just be ready for it.
So Prompt is 3 years old or 6 years old, depending on whether you're counting dog years or not.
Yeah.
What are you willing to share about what the financial trajectory of a startup looks like? Everybody wants things to happen quickly. Everything takes twice as long and costs twice as much. What has been your experience, and is that kind of a typical experience as far as the finances go?
Yeah. So our experience is typical in that we've been pretty cash strapped the whole time, and it's very intentional. Anytime we have money, we try and spend it on a human, because we love adding people to our team. I mentioned earlier that I'm consistently surprised by how often, or how everybody that we've hired brings incredible value to the table, and just sort of supercharges our growth as we continue to grow, both in headcount and just in the terms of the number of students that we serve. And so anytime we don't want to have money left over. We're not Apple, who can just sit on cash all day. We want to be spending that money to further our growth and further our mission. So we are typical in that sense. I think that we're atypical in that we have not received any venture funding. We have not really sought any traditional venture capital funding. Venture capital, I have a lot of thoughts on, but let me reserve a piece of that and hone in on what's important here, which I think is venture capital is really good if you are looking to sort of grow very quickly, potentially grow at all costs, depending on the people that you're taking money from. So it works really well for like SaaS products. It works really well for companies that have really high margins, that have really low variable costs. And so one of the things about our company is we are a tech-enabled service. We're not just a SaaS, service. We aren't just software. We have people who actually are delivering us their review and are meeting with students, and we build technology to make those people more efficient in the work that they do. And so it's a little bit harder for us to scale than like a traditional SaaS company. We definitely, I think, could have taken venture capital at a couple points if we wanted to, but we would have been compromising in those cases a piece of our mission. A lot of the venture capitalists that we talked to wanted us to move into the professional space a lot faster than we want to. They wanted us working with companies and editing like press releases or even just like emails within a company. And we were like, that's not quite what we want to do yet. We really think that we can focus on students and make them better writers. And the challenge that we ran into is that it's just a really small total addressable market that we were looking at. Investors were looking at like the college admission space, which is like a $200 million market. A lot of them want to see billions instead of millions on a total market size. And so that's why they were pushing us more into like a professional space. That's not to say that there aren't any venture capitalists that would have worked out for us. But when it comes to finding the right types of funding, it's really important that you are looking at the types of people that you're taking money from. And I mentioned earlier, like the returns that they're expecting, the time horizon that they're expecting those returns on. If they need a return, they're going to push you perhaps to grow in a way that sacrifices something else that you care about as a founder. Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes it's not. And luckily, we've been able to make it work without having to sacrifice too much.
Well, I personally think that's a good place to be. The culture at Prompt is incredible. It's really a joy to work there. Jordan, I've kept you over. We've kept you over. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you everybody for attending and again, spending an hour and 6 minutes of your Wednesday night with us. I hope this was helpful for everybody. All right.
Absolutely. If you have questions or you want to follow up with me, you absolutely can via jordan@prompt.com, PROMPT. I'm happy to respond to any emails. You can also reach me through Melissa, which I'm sure you already knew.
All right. Thanks. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.